Idealists believe that everything we experience is part of consciousness, and that everything that exists is part of consciousness. In other words, consciousness is fundamental to reality. Another problem that I see with this is that something cannot be fundamental to reality unless it exists by necessity. But everybody who's ever been unconscious has reason to believe that consciousness does not exist by necessity. And if it doesn't exist by necessity, then its existence is dependent upon something else. And it therefore is not fundamental to reality. At the very least, for example, consciousness is dependent upon time. If you stop the temporal events that make up consciousness, thoughts, perceptions, etc., then you eliminate consciousness altogether. I don't understand how something that is static can be considered to be conscious or considered to be a mind at all. To me, a mind is something that is always in flux. If something is not in flux, it doesn't make any sense to me to call it a mind. Also, I don't know what it would mean for a mind to exist in a way that is not contingent upon space-time. I don't know how to think of anything existing in a way that's not contingent upon space-time. I don't know how to think of the proposition that something could exist in the absence of space-time as being anything other than a contradiction. If I try to think of something existing, but then I take away the idea of space and the idea of time, I find I am not able to think of it as existing at all. I don't know how to conceptually separate the idea of existence from the ideas of space and time. I can't think of anything without presupposing space-time. William Lane Craig says that abstract objects like numbers can exist without space-time, but I don't even understand how that could be the case. I don't know how to think of a quantity without thinking of that quantity extending through space and time. So as best I can tell, the idea that a mind or anything else can exist in a way that is prior to and not contingent upon space-time is simply incoherent, and therefore the idea that consciousness is the foundation of reality is incoherent. Also, if idealism is true, then there's no way to explain consciousness. There's no way to explain why it exists or why it behaves the way it does. Suppose we do live in an idealist reality. When I have a thought, it's followed by a related thought. But why, if there is no underlying interaction governing my thinking, are my thoughts followed by related thoughts as opposed to by random thoughts or no thoughts at all? If there is no underlying unconscious process that necessitates that my mind works the way it does as opposed to some other way, then there's no explanation for why my mind or any other mind works the way it does. In other words, your mind exists and behaves the way it does because magic. And I've heard idealists say that you don't need to explain why consciousness exists, because any explanation you give is going to presuppose a consciousness that can understand it. Now, not only is that the biggest non sequitur I've ever heard, it's also a little too convenient that you can just dismiss the fact that you can't explain your worldview by saying it doesn't need to be explained. That's just the way it is.